Da, 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 da. Middle Ages, Renaissance, then the Reformation, 30 years religious wars, absolutist monarchs. Now it's the Enlightenment, Locke and Hobbes and Dare to Know, factories, woods of coal, Industrial Revolution, cry for freedom, then resounds, Vive la France! Decatur and Italy, Garibaldi and the red shirts, Bismarck and Germany, the power behind the throne. Mania starts World War I, Russian Revolution, then there's disillusionment in the world between the wars. Single-party governments, Munich and appeasement. Hitler starts invading, World War II's begun. Covert tensions escalate, Russia-US conflict, falling of the Berlin Wall, revolt in satellite states. 57 EEC established common market, European unity, now it's modern day.
Okay, so we're starting with Reformation, and with the opening we're going to be looking at the causes and the background of how did this all start, what was the setting like. In the 14th century and 15th century, that's where kind of like the seeds were sown, and then it's kind of taking root, and then over time it took a while for issues of the Reformation to actually pop out of the soil. Okay, so the Reformation did not just happen all of a sudden, but you have famous guys like John Wycliffe from England and Jan Hus from Bohemia. We talked about them before in chapter 10, how they were trying to speak against the Catholic Church. They were not part of the Reformation, but they were also contributing to it prior to it actually blowing up. Okay, so later we're going to talk about major names like Martin Luther, Henry VIII, John Calvin. Okay. And these are the guys that are going to actually be known for the Reformation, but it starts even earlier than that, right? It's a buildup of causes, and the causes are kind of summed up in a couple of C's. The crises that happened, the corruption of the Catholic Church, the critics of the Church, and Christian humanists that were part of the Northern Renaissance. Okay, so if you are a Christian or if you're Catholic, don't take anything personal. Right? A lot of things are said are very in your face. It's very out there just because of what history has happened, right? So essentially we're studying why was the Reformation such a significant event that really shaped European history, okay? All right, so let's blast through the crises. We've went over this before. The one thing to know is that what was spirituality like? What was religion like during the Middle Ages, right? And for the most part, people were always trying to secure eternal life. There's an emotion or a feeling of anxiety, right? Always being anxious because of all the events of the crises that we went over. Some of them I'll list right here, but the plague included. If you imagine, millions of people around you are dying, tens of thousands of in every town, and different political wars and breakdowns and overturning of leadership, right? Like people don't have stability, they're going to feel rather anxious. Okay, so the crises of the 14th and 15th centuries are going to be hurting the prestige of the clergy, and that's going to allow people to think like maybe we shouldn't put our trust and just listen to them completely. Okay, events we talked about before. The Great Schism was also known as the time of the Babylonian captivity from the late 1300s, early 1400s. Takes place in Avignon, France. Right, this is where Petrarch saw that the Babylonian captivity was kind of like, oh, why would you take away the Pope away from Rome? And so there was a lot of questions whether or not popes were the sole authority, because it's like, which pope am I loyal to, right? And so these problems are going to be more of a concern in Northern Europe rather than Italy at this time, because a lot of nobles looked at the clergy and always looked at them as like, oh, they have so many privileges and exemptions from taxes and stuff, and we shouldn't be able. They're very envious of them, right? And so those are kind of the things of why people started to look down upon clergy or not have high respect. Okay, and you also have the conciliar movement, right? This was where they're trying to change the structure of the church to say that, oh, the council has more power than the pope, but then over time they eventually still fell through and they have popes. Okay, all right. Second C is going to be the corruption of the Catholic Church, and so Anti-clericalism is going to be a huge theme of the Reformation. Okay, so what is anti-clericalism? Essentially, it's the resentments and complaints against the clergy, right? And we're going to see it's going to be for several different factors. I'll list them out, right? But this is the root of the problem, right? The clergy, the people representing authority, spiritual authority, are just screwing up. Okay, so during this time, Middle Ages going to the Reformation, Renaissance as well. Okay, you have simony, which is the buying and selling of high church offices, and oftentimes, why would you sell an office? Well, it's because you can make a living off of that, right? You can make some money off of that, and there's some profit for you. You put that in your pocket, okay? For example, in 1487, you have the Pope who sold 24 offices, right? And so this is kind of like weird because like you're selling this position, but it should be those that are qualified to be in a spiritual authority, right? In a spiritual position. And so a lot of the people that were part of the Reformation were very outraged that you have like some people that are very unqualified and they don't even belong to be in a spiritual authority, but they're bishops and cardinals because they could buy it, right? And that seems very backwards. Okay, pluralism is to hold multiple church offices, and in that same time, you're getting paid for each of the offices that you're put into, right? If you're a bishop here and if you're a cardinal there, right? You're getting like all these things, and it's really just for your own profit. And so the morality of choosing to do this without even like fulfilling your role, okay, was looked down upon as well. And so the clergy is usually the one that's most educated. That goes back into how education was. That's where the center of learning was. And not only are they having like offices as part of as clergymen, a lot of times that they're serving a lot of secular authorities, right, as administrators or lawyers, and they're carrying out certain duties, and this is going to take them away from a lot of spiritual concerns. They're more concerned about, oh, it's my job to help, right, this secular ruler, and these are my tasks, right? And so that's already taking away your time from serving the spiritual needs of the people. Next thing is the absenteeism, is where if you are holding office, you're not participating in a lot of the requirements you're supposed to be doing. However, you're receiving payment. And that happens when you have pluralism. Essentially, like I can't be in 3 places at once, and so I'm still reaping the benefits, but I'm not really doing my job. Okay, and that's a problem as well. Indulgence is going to be a huge thing. I'm just going to touch upon it very lightly. Essentially, as you can see in some of these images, right, people are paying money to the church, and from that they get a little certificate in saying that, oh, your sins are forgiven, so you could be less sinful, and you can even buy them for your loved ones. And we're going to be talking about what a penance is and how that plays into Martin Luther and John Tetzel and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so indulgences is known to be the things that people have to buy in order to be forgiven of their sins. Okay, nepotism. I think I mentioned this a little bit. This is where you favor family members to appoint them to different church positions. If you look at Leo X, Pope Leo X and Pope Clement VII, they were both sons of the Medicis, and they got kind of hooked up. Okay, Pope Paul III is going to make his grandson some cardinals, and they're very young at their age to be cardinals, right? They're just really like it's not even about like who's the most qualified. It's not about who's the most talented or who is the most hardworking, right? But it just comes down to like whoever subjectively they choose, right? Whether they're getting paid or whether it's someone of who they know familiarity. Okay, the moral decline is another reason why you see corruption in the Catholic Church. Pope Alexander VI, I mentioned how he had numerous affairs and had children that were out of wedlock, and constantly you're seeing that a lot of priests are going to be having mistresses and stuff, and it's just really bad, right? Very loose morals, very lax, and not holding to that standard of chastity. Okay. And then you have the abuse of authority. A lot of clergymen are just very ignorant. Priests are not even like educated properly, and they don't even care to, right? And they were nearly illiterate, and their job is to be preaching the Word of God in Latin at that time. And so a lot of times that they would use their authority as a way to abuse, and to twist people, to manipulate them, and saying, you have to do this for me or else I won't forgive you of your sins. And it was just very twisted in how they use their positions. Okay, so those that actually wanted to pursue piety, right? Those that wanted to, be truly virtuous in their religion, right? They tended to fall towards this thing called mysticism. It's not this like whole magical thing, but mysticism essentially, if I could kind of summarize it a little bit, is that Christians, they wanted to have a more meaningful experience with God, and so they're going to turn to mysticism, which is saying that they can bridge the gap between myself, the Christian, and God through just having a personal connection. Okay, my soul can connect with God, and I do not need reason. I don't need words. I don't need to be worshiping in this building. I don't need to fulfill the Catholic sacraments. I don't need to be doing any rituals, right? I have the ability to commune with God directly. And so mystics are not going to be like rebelling against the church. They believe in the Catholic doctrine of salvation, except that they wanted to do kind of their own thing and not being so formal and official with the Catholic Church all the time. And they wanted to offer kind of like a deeper religion. And it's going to be focused more on the individual. And that's what kind of they kind of went. Now, how does the Catholic Church respond to this? Oh, you don't need us, right? Like, you don't depend upon us? Well, you're a heretic, right? The things that you're saying you're making up yourself. Or in actuality, a lot of the different immoral decisions and things that are very wrong, right? That's known for anti-clericalism. Those are the things that actually were against, right, what was virtuous and moral. Okay. All right. So the significance of all of this is essentially this is kind of where the beginnings of the Reformation are going to be seen, and the corruption is where people are going to respond in reaction to this and say, you know what? People are going to accept that every person can, for themselves, connect with God. Okay, that's a value of the Reformation, and from that, it's not based upon your works of what you do, but it's based upon your faith. Okay, so that's kind of a value of the Reformation. So what is going to happen in the Reformation is that the Catholic Church is going to find that many different non-clergymen are going to be believing in changing the church versus trying to just slowly adapt and mention some reforms of, oh, that's not good, right? But there's going to be a revolution that's outside the church, trying to change the church from the outside, rather than the clergymen deciding, maybe we should be less corrupt, right? Luther, as I'm kind of name dropping right now, right? He's going to say that he agrees that every person should have their own relationship with God, and it's based by faith. Okay. All right. So the critics of the Catholic Church. One of them is John Wycliffe. Okay, he, a little bit of background, is the founder of the Lollard movement. So those that follow him after his death, right, is going to go all the way into the 1500s. He's also known as the morning star of the Reformation. Right, he comes before Luther, 100-some years before. He was one of the earliest opponents of papal authority to influence secular power. He was super anti-clerical, and he wanted to have a lot of reforms based upon the Bible. Okay, so what was he so upset about with the clergy was, one, there's so much wealth going to Avignon, right, the Babylonian captivity, Great Schism in the West. There was so much money going from England to the Pope in France that it didn't make sense of why we're supporting him with so much wealth, right? So the amount of wealth that clergy was getting. Second thing was also the amount of immorality amongst priests and clergymen, right? And so John Wycliffe really believed that the authority is not in the Pope, but it's actually in just the Bible, right? And so he also is going to be stressing personal communion with God. And he's going to say, the sacraments that the Catholic Church has established, that doesn't really matter. That's not even from the Bible. Okay, and so he is going to be kind of like excommunicated by the Pope. He's going to be, called out and saying like, oh, like you're being disobedient to the Catholic Church. Over time, he's going to be stigmatized like that, but he's going to be remembered for a lot of the writings and works that he did. Let me see, anything else about the Bible that he did. Good enough. Okay. All right. Jan Hus. Okay, he's from Bohemia, and so he spoke Czech. Okay, so his ideas were very similar to Wycliffe in the sense where he really symbolized a resentment against the Catholic Church, but also the German rule, right? So in Germany at that time, it was very much Catholic based. Right? The emperor was under the Pope, and the Pope was the one who was crowned the emperor. And so he really brought together kind of like this little amount of small level of nationalism for the Czechs, right, in Bohemia. And he was known to be one of the most famous preachers in Prague. He spoke against indulgences, and he spoke against purgatory, and he said these things like don't even like follow the Bible, and like you shouldn't be telling people to buy these things to forgive their sins. That's not how you get forgiveness of sins. It's through faith. And he even called the Pope a money grubber and the Antichrist, right? And so he would more than once denounce the infallibility of the Pope. Right, so Catholic Church established that the Pope is a sole authority, that he is the one who hears from God, is speaking God's will, and Jan Hus denounces that, says no, the Pope is not perfect, right? The Pope can have flaws too, he is fallible, right? And he said himself, to rebel against an erring Pope is to obey Christ, right? And so he's saying that Pope's corrupt, and because I'm going against him, I'm doing the right thing. I'm obeying Jesus Christ himself. Okay, he was called to recant, which means to like take back what he was saying. But he says, no, I don't believe that, and eventually he's going to be burned at the stake for his remarks, right? And the Catholic Church gladly burned him at the stake because of his refusal to take back his words. And it's going to take over 100 years, a century later, for Luther to step in and say the exact same things. And Luther will not recant either. Okay? All right. So the Northern Renaissance, we're going to have Christian humanists come out of it, but I got to describe to you, I got to describe to you what the Northern Renaissance is about, kind of. Okay? So the main differences from the Northern Renaissance to the Italian Renaissance are, first, you have kind of a blend of the old and new, where people outside of Italy in the Northern Renaissance were even less aware of the break from the Middle Ages. It was kind of like more of a continuous thing. Where in Italy, it was kind of like more like, oh, well, I guess we do care about art more. We are looking into the classical texts a lot more. That seems to be a little bit more prominent. But the Northern Renaissance is going to, hold more of what they had from the past. One thing that they're going to hold on to is religion more. That's going to be a huge value compared in Italy. Still important, but not as important compared to the Northern Renaissance, right? Thomas More and Erasmus are going to be two really important humanists from the North, right? One, Thomas More is from England, and then Erasmus is going to be from Holland. And we're going to be looking at their contributions as humanists, but as Northern humanists, okay? Where did the Northern Renaissance take place? You have Germany, France, Switzerland, the Low Countries, Denmark, Holland, Belgium, okay, and also England. All right. So the humanism in Italy is known as pagan humanism because it really was following a lot of like pagan paintings, right, of Greek and Roman gods, and basically the non-Christian culture of the Greco-Romans. However, Christian humanism is what the Northern Renaissance is going to be following, as I mentioned before, and they're going to be focusing on the ancient texts of Hebrew and Greek that the Bible is based upon, right? And also early church fathers. And Christian humanists want to deepen their understanding of Christianity by looking at the original intent of the original language instead of just reading it in Latin. And they want to restore the kind of the morals that come from the Bible in its original text, okay? German universities. So more and more universities are going to be developed in Germany, which is part of the North, whereas not as many in Italy, right? Originally, most universities started off in the Italian region, but later it's going to spread more north, and in around the 1400s is where you're going to see Germany establish, around 15 universities, and through one of them is where you're going to see Martin Luther come out of. Okay, so on the whole, Renaissance humanism was not a program just to seek knowledge so I could be more informed, right? But the knowledge is used to produce virtue, right? So the knowledge that you acquire as a humanist is to allow you to apply it and saying, I want to be virtuous, I want to be moral, and I want to be active in using my knowledge and not just retaining it for my own brain, right? And so I'm going to be applying it to my abilities and responsibility in society, right? As a citizen, as a person, I want to serve as a civilian, right? And from that, I can achieve a lot of things. Man is able to achieve a lot of things, have a lot of dignity and respect and honor by being virtuous, but that comes from knowledge. Okay. All right. Christian humanism, specifically now, we're looking at the roles that humanists played in society. Okay. So humanists, for the most part, they were secretaries. Okay. In society, they were diplomats, they were civil servants, and they really knew Latin and Greek, right? So they would even serve, certain popes or other clergymen, and they just did a lot of administrative jobs. Humanists, however, were concerned with Latin being slowly degenerating, where it was just like taught wrong, right? The people were learning Latin inaccurately. And so they felt that scholasticism during that time, right? We talked about humanism replacing scholasticism. That scholasticism was way too overly intellectual, and it didn't really provide actual moral change. And this is where Christian humanists are going to step in, right? Because Christian humanists are going to envision that Christianity is going to be purified because the language that they're going to be studying is going to be in its original form in Greek and Hebrew, and Christianity should be based upon Scripture. And so they have a very positive, optimistic view of humans, and it's because they were studying a lot of classical sources. So classical, as we remember, okay, they are talking about Greco-Roman texts, but also studying the original Greek and Hebrew language, and from that they can find out that a Christian can actually live a life that is informed, that can kind of be, how do I say this? They can be stronger than the temptations around them in the world, right? They can actually not be tempted to the point of giving up their faith, okay? And so they're going to be going back to the sources, as I mentioned. They're going to look at the original church fathers, early church fathers, St. Peter, St. Paul, their writings. They're going to look at classical Latin, right, during that time, not just the Latin in the Middle Ages that kind of got corrupted over time. And so this idea of sacred philology, right, the study of language, is really key to Christian humanists because they believed in establishing the best texts and editions, and so they wanted to kind of like go back to its purest form, right? And they're going to skip over a lot of these medieval writers because they felt like during the Middle Ages the Christians during that time were not as devout as the ones originally from the early church. Okay, and so no longer are Christian humanists going to be just like looking for translators to translate the Bible for them, but they're going to learn it themselves, and they're going to prefer, texts like St. Augustine, as we mentioned a long time ago, versus Thomas Aquinas. Okay, the humanist goal wasn't actually to attack the Catholic Church, but they wanted to bring appropriate changes based upon education, based upon learning what was the true meaning of the scriptures of the Bible at the time, and they believe that because the Catholic Church has learned and interpreted and even taught and educated incorrectly, that's what was causing the corruption. Okay, There were some criticisms, though, and it was really in the practices that the church was doing that was like, hey, why are you doing that? You're just doing it out of superstition, out of ritual, out of tradition, and it doesn't really have any sense. Like if you just kind of read it, like in scriptures, in the Bible, it doesn't say anything about having these relics that have any like special like powers or purpose, right? Or these images that you need to look at that were kind of as like devotional aids, like that was not necessary. And they felt that, yeah, like this is what has led to clergymen being so corrupt, and there was a feeling of like anti-clericalism, right? And that a lot of clergymen have become very ignorant to the fact what is true and what is not. They just accepted it just normally, okay? All right, Erasmus, really important guy. A little bit of background, he's called the Prince of Humanists. He's going to be one of the most important figures of all of the humanist movement. He is a Christian humanist, and he is going to hit a turning point in 1499 where he hears a humanistic lecture on the Bible and says, you know what, that's a really good point. I'm going to start learning the Bible this way, and he's going to embrace humanism. Okay, he's going to actually edit the New Testaments in 1500, and he wants to find the true Christianity because he felt that a lot of the doctrine by the Catholic Church has been twisted and distorted, and some of his goals and main concerns was that he wanted to bring reform. He wanted to bring changes to the Catholic Church, but within, right, through proper teaching and education. And so he had complaints, right? He complains, right? The main thing is that he still respected the Pope, okay? And he had some criticism of the clergy, but he wasn't like Luther that was so radical in saying like, you got it all wrong, okay? Erasmus was way more moderate. And there's a quote that says, Erasmus laid the egg that Luther hatched, okay? So essentially, Erasmus kind of like started it off, and then Luther just freaking cracked it open, right? And that's kind of how it all came through. That's very debatable. However, it is a good point because Erasmus did bring up some things about, you know, reform and changes and corruption of doctrine before Luther did. Okay, so as a humanist writer, he hated the Middle Ages. He didn't like scholasticism and hard philosophy, but he wanted to write on more humanist issues. Okay, and so some of the topics he would write about and talk about were morals, right? So as a moralizer, he wanted to take the middle road. He favored a gradual reform, very moderate. He did not like hypocrisy, and so he actually wrote The Praise of Folly, or In Praise of Folly, and he's saying that, you know, a lot of the Pope has, a lot of popes and bishops and cardinals have actually become very worldly, and he's kind of like poking fun at them a lot of the times, and he felt that in terms of morality, that people were often just too fickle and they needed to learn for themselves. Okay, what was the truth? He also wrote the Handbook of a Christian Knight, and this was a practical manual of how to live as a Christian, to have proper behavior, and it was a way to educate, to promote what a real Christian should do. Okay, and so that was another book that he wrote as a scholar, and he also wrote new Greek and Latin editions of the Bible. Okay, Erasmus is one of your key people. You need to kind of know him, remember him, and his significance. Okay, all right, wrapping up with Germany. So a few things that we understand, that the Reformation is going to come and start out of Germany. So what was Germany like at that time? Germany was on the eve of the Reformation at the turn of the 16th century. Okay, so around 1500s, they were at a point of progress, right? It was a very progressive region because of many different factors. For one, right, they were very politically diverse. As you look in this map, right, it wasn't so set in terms of, oh, a central government, right? But then you had German-speaking people, right? But then you had a lot of other minorities as well. You have people that are, you know, part of Switzerland that are kind of right there, and also the Netherlands, and it was kind of spread apart. As far as the economy that was going on in Germany, right? You have a lot of new towns coming up. The Fugger family, as we've mentioned before, right? They're becoming a very strong banking family, and so they're going to have more capital, and that's going to provide like a lot of progress for Germany. Okay. As far as new developments in science and technology, mining is going to be developed in the Rhineland, which is kind of like this border between France and Germany in those mountain ranges. And then you have the printing press that is also invented, right? That's going to be a huge asset in Germany because that's going to produce the first books with movable type. And some of those works, as I mentioned, was Luther's works, which is from Germany. So kind of put that together. You see that, okay? And then the foundation for modern math through Johann Müller. And that's going to be coming out of there. So a lot of new ideas are coming out of Germany at that time. And then you have cartography, which is Copernicus. And then you have Behem, who was the guy that made, Martin Behem, who made the terrestrial globe, which he named Erdapfel. Okay, and then you have Johannes Schoner, who made a globe as well. Okay, so a lot of these different developments allowed progress to come through Germany. Even though they're not unified, they just kind of pop up within the different German regions. One other last thing I want to mention is this group called the Brothers and Sisters of Common Life. They are not clergymen, but they are kind of an organization of what we call lay people. Lay people are those that are not of the clergy. They're just, serving and supporting the church. This group, this organization, Brothers and Sisters of Common Life, they are starting off in Germany and the Low Countries. Okay, Low Countries, as I mentioned before, and their goal was really to minister to the poor and establish schools for education and stuff. And Thomas A. Kempis is going to be one of the guys, and also another kind of Christian humanist during that time that's going to be part of that. And Erasmus is also part of this as well because he's from the Low Countries, Holland, and so he's going to be part of this organization as well. Okay.